A showy instructor mocked a quiet janitor for mopping his mats and dared him to spar for fun. The janitor set down his bucket, stepped onto the floor, and asked for one promise: an apology afterward. What followed didn't just silence the gym, it rewired it person by person, breath by breath. Silence lives differently in a gym after hours. The mats still warm with footwork, the mirrors holding on to shapes that used to be there. And that night, the only sounds were the slow sweep of a mop and the crisp bark of an instructor who liked the way his own voice echoed. James Washington had been working there just long enough to know which stains were stubborn and which weren't, the way to guide water. So it cooperated, the way to keep his head down and let people be who they were, yet a life does not stop at the wrist. It runs up the arm into memory. And the moment Derek Mitchell lifted his chin and said, "Hey, you, how about a little demonstration?" Something old and patient inside James turned its face to the light. He did not answer at first, only wrung the mop head once, the water falling in disciplined circles. Then he said quietly that he didn't want to interrupt, he'd be done soon, and that was all the invitation pride needed. Derek laughed, invited the class into the joke. And 8 students arranged their expressions the way people do when they're not sure how to feel, but know which way the room is leaning. James set the bucket by the wall, the handle settling with a modest click, and he stepped on a mat in work shoes that should have squeaked but didn't, that should have looked out of place but somehow didn't. And he said one thing, almost conversational: "When we're finished, you'll apologize to them for turning learning into theater." Wasn't defiance, it was housekeeping for the soul. And an uneasy ripple moved through the semicircle of students, including a quiet, observant purple belt named Sarah Chun, who had an instinct for the difference between demonstration and performance, between teaching and showing off, and she was already watching the small things. The way James stood like a man who knew where his weight lived. The way his breathing settled into a cadence that sounded like someone remembering a song from far away. Derek closed distance with a playful shove, a testing nudge, and met something he wasn't expecting: immovable patience. The shove disappeared into James like a wave into a harbor wall, and for an instant the room forgot how to swallow. Then pride rerouted through anger, and Derek told everyone to gather close because they were about to witness education, which is to say a plan. James let his eyelids float down, and in that half-second a world unfolded that nobody else could see. Rope canvas, leather, a single overhead bulb, a friend with a grin like sunrise, impact, a fall of silence too heavy for a body to lift. He had carried that silence for years, shut the door on it so hard the hinges cried, promised himself never again. And yet promises are bridges, not prisons. They let you cross when the time is right. He opened his eyes and found Derek's posture full of tells. The little shoulder lift that comes a heartbeat before a jab. The way tension creeps into the trapezius before the hips have decided. The stance that looks strong but isn't when pressure arrives at odd angles. "Ready?" Derek asked, bouncing, confident. And the first punch came alive like a photograph, remembering it was a movie, snap fast and clean, the sort of punch that wins a nod in a grading test, but not in a storm. And James was not where the punch needed him to be. He was a thumbprint of movement to the side, a slip that looked like courtesy, and Derek's fist found emptiness, which is the first kind of pain a fighter meets. Murmurs rose, the sound of people recalculating, and Derek threw a combination A. Crisp 1, 2, 3 he liked because it felt like a sentence that ends in triumph, and James answered with grammar he had learned the hard way. A slight drop under the first, a spine like a reed under the second. A small retreat that made the hook brush past his chin like a whisper of wind rather than a promise of sleep. "Good sequence," James said in a tone that belonged in a library, not a ring. "But your left side is a door you forget to lock." And if he had said it cruelly, the room might have gotten louder. But he said it as if he wanted Derek to get better, which made the room quieter. Heat climbed into Derek's face, and he said the line men say when their pride is thirsty, "Stop dancing and fight." And James's eyes softened, perhaps at the memory of a voice long ago that had told him the same thing. And he stepped in, not explosively, not with hunger, just with timing braided to distance. His right hand floated to Derek's chest, no more emphatic than a greeting. Yet the floor left Derek as if someone had pulled it. 2 meters later, he crashed on his back in an astonished exhale, the kind of sound that makes a room feel its own walls. Nobody clapped, nobody laughed. There's a kind of quiet that isn't silence. It's attention paying its debts, and it flooded the gym. James extended a hand, because dignity doesn't stop when advantage appears. And he spoke of leverage and timing, and how force is a river you guide rather than a hammer you swing. And as Derek stood, on his own, shaking, Sarah's thumbs were already moving, searching a name she had heard somewhere, thinking of a highlight reel she'd seen once, of a man whose calmness frightened even brave people. The results on her screen arranged themselves into a history built of tape and blood and applause and regret. And while she read in a low voice, the room learned that the quiet man who had rung a mop more beautifully than most people tie their shoes had once been a storm with a name, a master of angles and breath who walked away at the top, because victory had cost something he couldn't repay. Derek's face went pale in the particular way a person looks when their map is wrong and the terrain refuses to move. He said he didn't know, and James asked a question that trimmed the lie out of ignorance. If you had known, would you have behaved, or would you simply have chosen a different target? It slid into the room and sat down where excuses used to sit. Sarah stepped forward, the steadiness in her voice borrowed from every teacher who had ever corrected her with kindness. And she said what needed saying about respect and how students learn more from what you do than what you say. The semicircle found its spine, heads nodding in small arcs, and Derek lowered his, a man returning to himself after an unkind detour. Apologies came, which are necessary but never sufficient, and James accepted them like a craftsman accepts raw material. Useful but not yet a chair. What will change, he asked, and that question hung above the mat like a lantern, giving everyone enough light to see their own hands. Sarah, thinking faster than the moment required, asked whether James would consider teaching, not combinations and takedowns alone, but the part people neglect. The part where you discover if your strength is a servant or a thief. James looked at the mirrors and saw not his face, but the one he had carried like a second heart, the friend whose last breath lived forever at the edge of hearing. And he thought of where his footsteps began long before rings and cameras, of a morning light across a red earth yard where elders spoke in sentences that wrapped around time, of a proverb that said a river that forgets its source runs out of itself. Maybe, he said, and the room loosened as if it had been clenching without knowing. The weeks that followed remade the place in increments that felt like forgiveness. First, the banner in careful paint above the mirrors that read strength without respect is just violence. Then a small class at dawn where James talked more than he demonstrated, because power behaves better when it understands its purpose. Then the day Derek stood at the back, hands folded, asking real questions and not trying to trick the answers. Students who had once chased claps began chasing understanding, and the sound of training changed less impact. For its own sake, more footwork that honored angles, more breath held correctly. When James did show technique, it was with a modesty that made people want to do the same. Your hips tell the truth even when your shoulders try to lie, he'd say, and a dozen bodies would discover the difference between pretending to be grounded and being grounded. Sarah's video, she had recorded just enough to protect the truth and not enough to humiliate, found its way online, not with captions that sneered, but with a caption that listened. A teacher learns a lesson, a gym remembers itself. Views rose the way bread rises when the ingredients are simple and the timing is right, and comments arrived from people who had nothing to do with fighting, nurses and drivers and teachers, saying the same thing in different words. Thank you for the reminder. In time, Derek left to start something smaller in a part of the city where kids needed a place to put their afternoons. He wrote one sentence on his front door and meant it. Leave your ego outside. James visited quietly one day and watched Derek kneel to a child's height to adjust a stance, then bow to the child afterward in a way that gave the bow back. There are victories you cannot post because they are not a picture, they are a temperature change. Back at the old gym, someone asked James during the first rain of spring what the hardest fight of his life had been, and he smiled in that way that belongs to people who answer with more than the question deserves. The one where you stop trying to win and start trying to be worthy, he said, and a soft laugh moved through the room as if it had found a place to sit. He cleaned the mat after class not because he had to, but because care looks the same in every job. Long strokes, corners done right, water changed when it should be. Once laid alone in the hum of lights. He pressed his palm to the center of the floor and felt the faintest drumbeat that wasn't there, memory drumming on its own table. And he let a few words rise in the old cadence of home, words that don't need translation because the body knows them, and he thanked the path that had refused to give up on him even when he had given up on it. Months later, when a newcomer asked about the night a janitor sent a proud man flying with a touch, veterans of that silence smiled and said the throw wasn't the point. The point was what stood up afterward. The point was how the room breathed differently the next day. The point was that apologies, when followed by effort, sound like footsteps. James would finish the evening classes with something like a benediction. Technique will give you options, timing will give you quiet, and respect will tell you which option to take. If you remember only one thing, make it the last of those. And he would bow and mean it. The story traveled the way good stories do, not as a parade, but as a rumor of relief. Barbers told it while shaping hairlines sharp enough to catch the light. Cooks told it with ladles pausing in the steam. Night shift workers told it in a coffee they didn't have time to finish. Somewhere in all that traveling, the story lost its need to justify itself. It became a mirror people carried for a moment and then handed to the next person. When the wind angled just so on evenings that ended in gold, James would step outside and stand where the day thins into night. And he would lift his face as if there was something to hear in a sky that has been listening longer than men have been fighting. And if you were close, you might hear him say softly, "We did it right this time." Not to himself exactly, but to friendship, to the art that took and gave, to footsteps that now landed where they should. And if you stayed for the closing credits of that night, you'd find your own reflection in the dark glass of the gym door and understand why the room had changed. Not because a man flew backward, but because a different kind of force landed, one that doesn't. Bruise. So when you walk away from this story into your next conversation, your next moment where you could posture or you could listen, remember the small touch that carried oceans. The idea that strength is a servant. And if this found you at a time when you needed proof that gentleness does not mean weakness, that patience is not passivity, take it with you. And if the telling brought you a little quiet where noise usually lives, share it with someone who walks into rooms carrying too much heaviness. Breathe, straighten your stance, lower your center by an inch, and ask for what matters most. Not victory, not spectacle, but the apology that turns into change. If this stayed with you, subscribe so these reminders have somewhere to meet you next time, because the world will always have louder stories, but the ones that last are told in low voices by people who have cleaned the floor and then taught you how to stand on it.